Welcome back everyone. Today we're going to do a video about Generation 4 versus Generation 3 of my cages. What's changed, why it's an improvement. I'm super stoked about it because this is the first time we've made a fundamental change to the motors. So on that, these are the Brother Hobby R6 2205 motors, which look absolutely beautiful. And this is now designed for those motors and no longer the Brother Hobby RB2205s. Now there is a difference in kV. The Brother Hobby motors are lower, so that does affect, or at least theoretically affect, the ultimate FPS you can get, but that just affects battery choice. The motors are definitely much higher quality, they've got much better magnets, and this change alone has resulted in more stable FPS and therefore more stable accuracy and quieter operation. They've got a different base, which is very useful for cooling. One of the things we had was a cooling issue. They've got much bigger vents. Sorry, get in the middle. And if we compare the tops of the motors, there's quite a big difference there. And one of the problems we had is when we retained this in the bottom of the cage, the only way it could suck air is through these 4 little holes I had made. These little holes are for the screws. The bigger holes are for the ventilation, which actually doesn't allow for too much ventilation. The only way you could get them was through these holes on the bottom. There's nothing on the side, and on the side didn't matter because we used the side to retain the motor anyway. Whereas on the new cage, the motors go in, there is a gap between the bottom of the cage and the top of the motor, so air can actually get sucked in all the way around the bottom of this. It's not only getting sucked in through the holes. We have added some holes, but they're actually not super critical because, like I said, it can actually suck it, and when the wheels are in, there is a gap underneath the wheels. Well, this is probably a better example. So it can suck the air up through that gap as well. So this is a significant improvement in cooling, which is awesome. Obviously you've got much bigger vent holes. The motors are retained in the old R3. There was a little indentations which went onto the little holes in the motor. We have increased those on the R6, which is actually super hard to show you. It is super hard to show, isn't it? Which fit into those there. One important thing about the R6 is that it doesn't have a clockwise and counterclockwise. So it does have this bumpy section, and with those we shouldn't have any problems with spin-offs. Now another reason, and the main reason why I went to this particular motor and this style of open top, is that obviously it was going to improve ventilation through just having a lot more surface area to suck air through versus those little holes. And when I cut those little holes out, it was even smaller. And we do need to remember that we couldn't make those holes too big, because then it doesn't actually leave much meat to hold the nuts in, because of course they're quite close, and this is not made of aluminium. That is another change we've made. We were using the screws that came with this to retain it, which just meant the thickness of the M3 nut was helping on a vertical push, and well, that's not vertical, that's horizontal, and vertical just the head of it. With the R6, I'm not going to use the existing screws. I've gone to countersunk M3s, which help with a bit of getting pulled out more and out, depending on which we're referring to. So that's pretty cool. Now, back to one of the fundamental problems of the cage, which was having to modify either the wheels, not the wheels, the motors or the shell. So historically, I've always said you needed to cut the top off the motors, the shaft, which didn't matter, or drill a hole in the shell to get them to fit. And even this with the Swordfish, with that cut down, that still actually did run on the top of the Swordfish, or the top of the bottom of the top, because the Swordfish is made out of thicker plastic. So we have managed to fix that with the new motors. So the new motors are set down quite a lot more. If you like, the original motors would have sat up here, whereas these, the new ones are recessed down into that. That does make this 2.5mm thicker. However, you could say the ultimate height is the same because I now have countersunk screws versus the screws which came with this motor, which stuck up 3mm. But when we put that in a Swordfish Stryfe, what is this thing, Dominator, we've always had this problem that if I can, that of course doesn't fit in there, that you have this line running here and here on the Dominator, which meant you had to cut the cage to fit them, which was okay, but because of the size of the base on this, that it limited how far down the motor could sit, because the side of the motor needed to clear over the top of this, which meant the motor had to sit relatively high up. But luckily on the R6 motor, because we've got all of this cut off, there's just enough space that we can build the cage that goes across here, and we have this overhang to hang down and over that side. So if you can see it here, that is obviously recessed below with the motor overhanging, but it's not obviously going to touch that. So we can now, I don't think this will fit in here, because that's for the Swordfish. So that will now fit in a Swordfish / Stryfe, whatever, lower, and therefore this top of the motor doesn't touch the inside of the shell. So that means we don't need to either grind the top off the motors, and these are being titanium, so that might be quite hard. I think it's titanium. And we don't need to drill the cage, so that's pretty exciting. And these motors are actually just lower to start with. They're also lighter, well, actually not sure if they're lighter, so they're lower, but they've got a smaller outside diameter, which means for the same crush you have more inner wall thickness, which helps to strengthen them. And another thing, because of the recess, we have been able to change the bottom of the motor and the top of, we've been able to change the wheels. So the wheel can sit a lot more flatter. It actually doesn't show very well on the video, but this angle and the size of that is much reduced because on this one the motor had to sit so high that we had to then kind of offset it back to have the center of the motor, the center of the wheel line up with the center of the cage. But now with the motor sitting so much lower, that size of that bulky top bit has been reduced. I have also increased the size of the bottom, which you can see. This was just a rough print, which will help with the strength of the bottom. And we've also managed to get away with removing this comfort, this angle. That angle there again had to go over this angle here, which retained the bottom of the motor. But since now the motor sits so much lower, the retention of the motor is held down there, and there's nothing up here. So we've been able to move that down a lot more, increase the thickness of the bottom, and the bottom now goes all the way in, which I think will help a lot with deflection and heat. Well, being able to handle heat anyway, because obviously this is now much stronger and it's ultimately more balanced, the top and the bottom, but I don't think that matters too much. The wheel is actually ultimately lower than this, or not as tall, but I don't think I can realistically show that on the video, but it is a few mil or something lower. So that is G4. Main benefits are changing the motor, much higher quality motor, therefore better acceleration, better braking as well, spin down. It's better spin down thanks to the better magnets. Based on independent testing, that means not by me, we got quieter operation, better accuracy, better FPS running this. The motor does sit lower in the cage, woohoo, which means we no longer need to cut the shell or the top of the motors for them to fit. Improved ventilation. I mean, the ventilation is just a massive increase. Before we had to suck all of it through these holes here, and now I can suck it through the gap underneath the wheel, through the holes we've got, and it will be able to suck it through this massive gap on each side, which is great. And obviously we've got much bigger ventilation on the top. We have slightly changed the radius on here. Everyone's always asked for a radius on there. It did have a comfort or whatever on it, and although the model always looked different to how it printed, so I didn't worry about that too much because it couldn't print at a sharp angle. It always actually resulted in a curve. Oh yes, it does fit the same. I've only got the red ones. It does fit the same. Oh, that's actually for the. This is specific to the Dominator, but it does fit the barrels and guides. You have a couple of options in length of barrels. Obviously the barrels are designed to increase accuracy. The guides are simply there to prevent or / reduce jams on the exit. Just the guides have a greater OD, well, the ID, than the barrel, because of course that's roughly how you increase accuracy, is by reducing the internal diameter of the barrel and making it longer. So if you're all caring about FPS, then you should just use the guides. If you care about accuracy, you should run the barrel. Obviously, if you have a limit, you should run the barrel FPS limit, that is. But I do believe this has been the biggest fundamental change. Although the last change where we added these guides and the barrel was a huge upgrade, this is yet another significant change. These motors are significantly more expensive than the cheap RB2205s, obviously, and at this point I'm expecting to keep the Generation 3 cages going, because why not? They work. They're cheaper. They may get removed at some point, but at this point I'm not expecting that to happen. Yeah. Cool. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, that'd be great. This only happens because of my Patreons and whatnot. So please jump on, be a Patreon. You can obviously download this for free and use it. So please do, but don't sell it. Yeah, help us to make everything better. This entire project is effectively Facebook orientated. Join the group. People complain / make comments, and we take their opinions seriously, and so we make changes, and that's the way it has always rolled ever since the beginning. After I made the original one, people have come back and said this, that, and the next, and we're like, oh yeah, okay, I'll work on that, and that's what we have done. Alright, see you later guys, bye bye.